This is the story of the legend of Saint Christopher. This part of it, which is that Saint Christopher is a monstrous, giant, sometimes dog-faced Canaanite, and so he's a Canaanite in many ways. He's a descendant of Canaan, that is the giants that were there in the Old Testament in the land of Canaan. But ultimately, he's also something like a descendant of Cain in a more metaphorical way, that is through the sonority of the relationship between Cain and Canaanite and Canine. All of these things come together so much that the scholars will tell us that it's just all errors of transcriptions, where they made a mistake between Cain in terms of the son of Adam and Eve, then Canine in terms of dog, and Canaan in terms of the land where the Israelites came into. But as we know, the manner in which symbolism happens doesn't necessarily have to account for mechanical causation through attention. That is, that the fact that people would be able, even in terms of transcription, the fact that they would be able to confuse those, and that those errors in transcriptions would make sense to those that read them later, means that the connection is there and can help us understand what it is that's going on. So the story has him as this dog-faced warrior in the land of Canaan. And what he has is he has this insight. He wants to serve the strongest king, the strongest man in the world, the strongest being. And so he kind of leaves his edge of the world, this strange land of dog-faced monsters, giants, and he encounters a king, a great king. Now, he goes to the king and sees in him like, wow, this king is super powerful. I want to serve this king. So he enters into the service of the great king, and of course is very appreciated by the king because he's a very fierce and powerful warrior. But one day, Saint Christopher, at this moment, he's called Reprobus. Actually, he's not called Saint Christopher. Reprobus is a good name for a monster, isn't it? And so Reprobus sees that this Canaanite king, this powerful king, is afraid of the devil. He avoids saying the word the devil, or different ways of showing that he's actually afraid of the devil. And so, Reprobus is curious and asks the king. He says, like, who is this? So who's this devil figure? Now, the king doesn't want to tell him. And he says, well, look, if I tell you who the devil is, then you'll leave me and you'll go serve the devil, right? And this is where now St. Christopher appears as a trickster. Reprobus is a trickster because he tells the king, if you don't tell me who the devil is, then I will leave you. And of course, the king is forced to tell Reprobus who the devil is. And no surprise here, Reprobus leaves the king to find the devil. And so the king has been tricked. He finally comes to serve the actual devil and enters into the army of the devil. Now think about this, like he becomes a saint later. So he serves the devil, and the devil's super powerful, obviously, most powerful being there is. And he realizes that the devil is afraid of the cross. And so he's like, okay, well, what is this thing? Like, if the devil is afraid of it, it's got to be very powerful. So he asks the devil, what's this whole thing about the cross? Like, what is this about? And the devil says, well, I'm not going to tell you who this Christ figure is. If I tell you, then you'll leave me, right? Same thing as in the first story. And Reprobus plays the same trick. He says, if you don't tell me, then I will leave you. The devil is forced to tell Reprobus, and of course Reprobus leaves. And so now the devil has been tricked. So Reprobus goes out and he wants to find this Christ. He's like, I want to find the most powerful being in the world. I want to find this Christ. And he doesn't find Christ right away, but he encounters monks and he's asking about, he's like, I'm looking for Christ, I'm looking for Christ. And the monk says, well, I can show you how to find Christ if you want. And Reprobus is like, all right, he's the most powerful being. So I need to, so tell me how to find Christ. And so the monk says, all right, so if you want to find Christ, if you want to serve Christ, then you have to pray. And so Reprobus is like, okay, he's a monster. He's a giant dog-faced, maybe possibly used to be a cannibal monster. And he's like, no, I can't do that. I can't pray. So, all right, the monk says, okay, so if you can't pray, then maybe you should fast. And again, Reprobus is like, fasting, it's not going to happen. He is a monster after all. And so the monk says, you know what? You could stand next to the river, right? And when people come to you, you can cross them over the river because there's no bridge and it's dangerous. And so Reprobus is like, you know what? I can do that. I can do that. So he goes next to the river. So think about now what's happened. And so the monk has asked Christopher to do two things. He's asked him to pay attention and pray, and he's asked him to remove these garments of skin, fast. So cut off the excess and focus on the highest thing. Those are the two aspects, right, of how we cohere. We have to remove and we have to eliminate the periphery and the things that aren't part of the identity, and then we have to cohere towards to the single identity that constitutes things. And he couldn't do either, right? Because he's a monster. That's what he is. He's an idiosyncrasy. He's all of those things on the edge. But this is where we see the mystery of what can happen. And so he is potential. And so as potential, as a body, right, he is the one who can cross over the river. He's the one who can bring you across like a boat, like the garments of skin. And so he's crossing people over the river. And then one day, a young child, baby, very small child comes to him and asks Reprobus to cross him over the river. So Reprobus, takes the child, puts him on his shoulder, starts to cross the river. And so as he's crossing, he becomes heavier and heavier and heavier to a point where Reprobus feels like he's going to go under. Like Reprobus feels like he's going to die. He's not going to be able to make it across the river. And so there are different versions. Sometimes he asks them in the middle of the river. Sometimes he asks them when he finally was able to cross over. It doesn't matter which one. And so let's say he crosses over, puts the child down, and then asks the child, like, why were you so heavy? And the child answers, because I was carrying the sins of the world. And then you know what happens, right? I've already told you what happens. Then Christ vanishes, goes up into heaven, because that's how it works. Like that's how this crossing pattern works. And St. Christopher has crossed the river. Now, there are different versions of what happens after he's crossed the river. In some versions, he realizes now he's transformed back into a human person. In other versions of the story, he has a staff that burgeons. He has a dead piece of wood that now starts to grow leaves and branches. Okay, so you can understand what it is. It is this new world. He is moved across the waters, and he is the one who will act as the potential and the capacity for the world to start again. But the most interesting thing in this story is that all this time, Reprobus, and of course he's renamed Christopher, right? After he crosses the river, that's where he's renamed Christ carrier. But all this time, Reprobus tricked the king of Canaan, tricked the devil, but now he's been tricked. He's been tricked to his salvation. That is, he wanted to serve the strongest man in the world. And what he ends up doing is serving the weakest possible thing, a baby. And so he actually thinks, how can I say this? He thinks that he's serving the weakest thing and is being tricked into actually serving the strongest. And he would not have even been capable of seeing that. That's also, let's say, the insight you need to get here. He would not be able to see the strongest thing or the highest thing, because the highest thing is often hidden like a seed. It's actually not that visible. It's actually not the thing that is the shining thing in armor. The highest thing is the hidden spiritual transformation, which occurs inside people. The highest thing is the monk hidden in a cave somewhere in a mountain who prays all day and all night, and you don't see and you don't hear about, but who is actually holding the world together. And so here we can see this double trick, this double inversion that Metzger and I talk about, of how death is used to transform, there's a trick played on death. And the trick that Christ played on death when he went down into Hades and surprised Hades by taking it over is similar to the trick that Christ is playing on Reprobus as he crosses the water, coming to the other side and finding that he has now been saved and that he is now participating in furthering the kingdom of God further out into the world.